Hey folks, Matt Dragonstone here with a quick and utterly shameless self-promotion before we start today's episode. You've probably been listening to the podcast for quite some time now, and maybe you're wondering what else I do with my time when I'm not on here. Well, I'm here to tell you that I do get up to plenty, and it's all available on or through my website dragonstoneastrology.com. I offer a variety of tarot and astrology readings for one thing. I do these online via Zoom and also offer pre-recorded readings for those of you who live in Nantucket or Magnitogorsk or somewhere other than Australian Eastern Standard Time. They're really popular at the moment and they're cheaper than a Zoom reading, so check them out. I make astrological talismans. I've completed Chris Warnock's grueling astrological magic course, and I've been offering authentic handmade talismanic jewelry to the public since 2022. These are authentic astrological talismans which follow traditional sources such as Picatrix and Agrippa, and there's heaps of them on the website with something for every budget. I write books. This year I've published 2 books, Tarot for the Spiritual Seeker and my newest publication, Lunar Wisdom, Interpreting the Moon and Harnessing Its Phases for a Purposeful Life. They're great reads and an excellent introduction to both the tarot and astrological and spiritual significance of the moon. Check them out. Finally, I offer courses and workshops online. I've just launched my newest course based on Tarot for the Spiritual Seeker, which I've called Tarot Foundations. It's an absolute bargain. Self-paced, no prerequisites, no mandatory readings, $60 Australian for lifetime access to over 5 hours of detailed foundational tarot learning and access to my private Discord server, the Community of Spirits. There's heaps of other stuff on the website too, my whole talisman back catalogue, articles, and much, much more. So if you're looking for a way to support the podcast, you can do no better than starting with a visit to dragonstoneastrology.com. That's dragonstoneastrology.com. Thanks for listening, guys, and let's get on with today's episode. Ciao! Hi, I'm Matt Dragonstone, and welcome to the Dragonstone podcast. Today, I just wanted to talk briefly about suffering. I don't know about you, but I'm starting to notice that people's general state of mind is getting far worse because of the current events that are taking place in the Middle East. I wanted to look into the current geopolitical state just very briefly, and not from a predictive point of view, to see how and why our mindsets in the West are reacting the way they are, especially given the levels of comfort that we enjoy and have enjoyed historically. I wanted to touch very, very quickly, very briefly, on a couple of key texts that I want to start looking in depth at in future episodes. But today I just wanted to set the scene. I want to talk about suffering, I want to talk about the West, I want to talk about how, because of the atheist materialist culture that we've been brought up in, suffering is so much more impactful to us. Hopefully by the end of these series of episodes, we'll be able to reposition how we view suffering and, importantly, how we use it. So stay tuned, have a listen, and look out in the show notes because I put links to each of these texts, free versions, PDFs, that you'll be able to access and read for yourself. Let's get started. So imagine waking up to these headlines in 2026. Missiles streaking over the Strait of Hormuz, petrol lines stretching for blocks in Melbourne, Manchester, Los Angeles, AI redundancies hitting white-collar jobs overnight, coders, analysts, creatives, all gone in a single boardroom decision. The world you built, the comfortable, predictable, abundant world, is suddenly crumbling beneath your feet. How do you stay standing when everything you relied on is taken away? When petrol runs dry, the shelves empty, and the career that once defined you vanishes? When the very ground of your security disappears? That question isn't hypothetical anymore. For millions of us in the West, right now, in real time, it's becoming painfully real. So today I wanted to talk about how the purpose of faith has always been to sustain us in times of difficulty, and why, in the West, with its affluent materialism, we are suddenly uniquely unprepared for the hardships that are now unfolding. We'll move from the fires of today's geopolitical and technological crises to the rising suffering that they're unleashing into the spiritual void left by a culture that told us comfort was our birthright, and then into the timeless wisdom that has carried humanity through every dark night in history. Finally, we'll walk away with practical tools to cultivate the kind of inner fortitude that no external storm can destroy. As someone who was raised deep inside the comfortable Western bubble where good jobs, endless convenience, and endless distractions are the norm, I know firsthand what spiritual bankruptcy feels like when the bubble starts to crack. There are some ancient voices though, Stoic, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, and others, that changed the way I thought. They changed how I stood when the ground shook around me, and I believe that they can do the same for you. So if you're feeling the tremors, if the news feels heavier than it used to, if your sense of security is fraying, then you're in the right place. So let's talk about Iran. February 28th, 2026. US and Israeli strikes hit Iranian leadership compounds and nuclear facilities in a single coordinated night. Tehran's response was swift and surgical. Wave after wave of missiles, and then the move that changed everything, the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. For those who don't live and breathe energy markets, that narrow choke point carries almost 20% of the world's daily oil supply. One day it was open sea lanes, the next it was a war zone. Tankers diverted or simply stayed in port, insurance rates tripled overnight, and just like that, the global oil shock was on. Here in Melbourne, where I live, I've already felt it at the Bowser. Diesel and petrol prices jumped 30 to 50% in a matter of weeks. Not in some far-off city or some far-off country, in my own suburb, and likely also in yours. Trucks that deliver our groceries, our medicine, the parts for our cars, everything. Suddenly the cost to move anything skyrocketed. Supply chains that once hummed like clockwork are stuttering. Factories are cutting shifts. Supermarket shelves that used to be stocked floor to ceiling are starting to look thin. Inflation isn't a headline anymore, it's the extra $50 that I hand over at the cash register for the same weekly shop. Middle-class budgets, the ones built on the quiet assumption that fuel would always be cheap and shelves would always be full, are collapsing under the weight of energy costs alone. Transport is grinding to a halt, plane fares are spiking, farmers are watching diesel prices eat their margins before the crops have even left the field. This isn't abstract geopolitics, this is your mortgage, your commute, your kids' school lunches getting more expensive by the week. And it's not stopping at the pump either. Layer on top of this shitstorm the other earthquake that's happening in silence, the AI disruption of white-collar work. We were all promised that artificial intelligence would free us from drudgery. Instead, it's doing something far more personal. Coding jobs that paid 6 figures 6 months ago, automated. Legal analysis, financial modeling, even creative copywriting and design briefs, scaled out overnight by models that never sleep. Mass layoffs are hitting offices that once felt untouchable. Skills that took years to master are suddenly obsolete. And with the paycheck goes something deeper, identity. That quiet Western story we told ourselves, I am what I produce, I am what I earn, I am what I consume, is cracking. You hear it in the voices of friends. My labor suddenly feels meaningless. That erosion of purpose is happening in cubicles and home offices all around the Western world, all while the cost of simply living keeps climbing. So this isn't happening somewhere else. This is dismantling, piece by piece, the relative affluence that the West took for granted for decades. The safety net we thought was woven from economic growth, cheap energy, and endless technological progress is tearing. And when the safety net tears, suffering doesn't knock politely. It walks straight in. But what do we even mean by suffering? It's not just pain. Pain is physical. Suffering is something else. It's the gap between the life we expect and the life that actually arrives. In the 20th century, a psychiatrist called Viktor Frankl happened to find himself in Europe during World War II. Frankl was a Jew, and he and his family were put into various concentration camps in Nazi-occupied Europe. Frankl's wife, his daughter, and other members of his family died, but Frankl survived. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and in that book, he describes suffering really, really well. Frankl says of suffering, "Human suffering is absolutely relative. It also follows that a very trifling thing can cause the greatest of joys or despair." Think about that. In the camps, a crust of bread or a kind word could spark joy. Back home, a delayed Uber Eats delivery or a lower bonus could plunge someone into despair. Suffering isn't measured by the size of the blow. It's measured by how far reality falls short of our expectations. Consider St. John of the Cross, the Spanish mystic writing centuries before Viktor Frankl. He described the same reality in Dark Night of the Soul. John of the Cross called suffering the soul's dark and arid purgation, that desolate season when all our old supports vanish and we're left wandering in a spiritual desert. The comforts we leaned on, the identities we built, the future we assumed was ours, suddenly they're gone. And in that emptiness, the soul is stripped bare, not as punishment, but as preparation. Frankl and John of the Cross both knew something our culture has forgotten. Suffering isn't the enemy, it's the forge, but only if we have a map for it. Look around right now. The Iranian retaliation has closed the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices have surged 30 to 50% in weeks, diesel is about to be rationed, transport costs are through the roof, nothing is getting through the ports. Families in the West who budgeted for school fees and mortgage repayments are now choosing between groceries and petrol. At the same time, AI is gutting white-collar work. Overnight, entire career ladders have been pulled out from under people. Fuel shocks strip away material security, AI strips away purpose. The West, raised on the promise that hard work plus consumer comfort equals a stable life, now faces sudden precarity. Job loss, empty shelves, unaffordable basics. The cushion we thought was permanent has disappeared, and when that happens, suffering doesn't just arrive, it multiplies. So what makes this suffering uniquely brutal in the West compared to some of the atrocities that we've been seeing on the news in the past 6 to 8 months? I think it's 3 things in particular. First, the loss of deserved comfort. We grew up in a consumer paradise. Air conditioning, same-day delivery, streaming entertainment, medical miracles. Everything designed to keep discomfort at arm's length. When the power flickers or the shelves empty, it doesn't just hurt, it feels like a betrayal. This wasn't supposed to happen to us. Second, isolation. Most of us don't have extended family compounds or village rituals where the whole community gathers to share the burden. We are isolated in the West. We suffer alone in our apartments, scrolling through feeds that only make the emptiness louder. Third, and this is the deepest cut, the spiritual vacuum. In a fundamentally materialist culture, we have no narrative that tells us suffering has meaning or reward. No ancient stories of purification, no promise that endurance leads to something greater. Faith, once the scaffolding that held people up through plagues, wars, and famines, has been quietly sidelined as superstition. So when the material world cracks, there's nothing left to hold us. Just anxiety, depression, escapism, and rage. We have more than any civilization in history, yet we feel emptier than all who have come before us. And what happens if this conflict in the Middle East escalates? A prolonged Hormuz blockade means months, maybe years of global recession. Nuclear risk remains low but real. Escalation ladders exist. Refugee waves, cyber attacks, energy rationing, all of it will land hardest on the West because we have the most to lose. We are just simply not built for this. We've spent decades outsourcing resilience to grocery apps and central banks, and now the bill is coming due. But here's where the story turns. Every past civilization, when the ground shook, turned towards faith, not as an escape, but as the very source of endurance. They discovered that suffering, met with the right inner map, doesn't break us, it actually forges us. Now let's name the deeper trap that has made all of this feel so catastrophic. Because the real crisis isn't just the missiles over Hormuz or the AI redundancies. It's the worldview that told us those things could never touch us in the first place. Let me define it plainly. Atheistic materialism. It's the quiet, everyday religion of the modern West. the one we don't even call a religion. It says, only what science can measure is real. Only economic growth and personal pleasure matter. God, soul, or transcendence? Superstition for simpler times. Keep your head down, stick the wins, optimize your life, and the universe will keep delivering. And you know what? For a while, it delivered spectacularly. We have effectively conquered scarcity in the West, or at least we convinced ourselves we had. Unprecedented wealth, technology that turned science fiction into reality, medicine that added decades to our lives, convenience at the swipe of a finger. We built the most comfortable civilization in human history, and for most of us born after 1980, that comfort felt like the default setting of reality. Petrol was cheap, groceries showed up, jobs were mostly stable, suffering was something that happened to other people, on the news, far away. We told ourselves we were post-faith, post-superstition, post-need for anything bigger, and the material world rewarded us so handsomely that it felt like proof. But here's the hidden cost. The spiritual bereftness it left behind. When everything is material, suffering has no purpose. It's just a sign of broken machinery, a glitch in the system that should be fixed or medicated or distracted away. There's no framework for why we suffer or how to endure it gracefully. No larger story that says this pain might be refining you, teaching you, or preparing you for something eternal. So when the material supports vanish, when the job that defined you disappears overnight, when the fuel prices make your weekly shop feel like a moral crisis, when the life you were promised starts crumbling, there's nothing left to hold on to. Your identity was tied to possessions, status, and productivity, all of it external, all of it fragile. Take those away and what's left? A hollowed out self screaming, but I was supposed to be comfortable. The result, we see it everywhere now. Skyrocketing anxiety, depression that no amounts of therapy can fully touch, escapism through screens, substances, outrage cycles, and underneath it all, a low-grade rage. This wasn't supposed to happen to us. We have more than any generation in history, and yet we feel emptier the moment that this more starts to disappear. Every past civilization understood something we've forgotten. When the world on fire arrives, people turn to faith. They reach for something transcendent. They look for meaning that survives the loss of everything else. The Romans in their decline, the medievals through the Black Death, the ancient Israelites in exile. Crisis after crisis, they reached for the divine, for the soul, and for the eternal. The West is the first major civilization in history to declare itself post-faith. And then watch its material comforts start to unravel at exactly the same time. We're not just facing fuel shortages and AI disruption, we're facing the bill for a worldview that told us we didn't need any inner fortitude because the outer world would always provide. But here's the good news I want to lean into next. These ancient traditions never abandon us. They've just been waiting in the pages of the texts our grandparents set aside. Stoicism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, even the logotherapy of Viktor Frankl, and the symbolic language of alchemy, they all understood that suffering isn't the end of the story, it's the crucible. And they offer us something materialism never could. A roadmap for resilience that doesn't depend on petrol prices, job titles, or the latest fucking iPhone. Now we're going to turn to timeless voices that don't sugarcoat difficulty but show us how to meet it with inner fortitude. I'll share one or two short excerpts from each of these major schools, then reflect on what they mean for our 2026 reality. First, the Stoics, practical philosophers who lived through empires rising and falling. From Epictetus's Enchiridion, listen to this. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things. Epictetus continues with the famous dichotomy of control. Focus only on what is up to you, your opinions, aims, desires, and aversions. Everything else, body, property, reputation, even missiles over the Strait of Hormuz, that's not yours to control. In our current crises, we can't stop the Iranian retaliation closing the strait, nor can we magic back the white-collar jobs AI just automated overnight. but we can choose our view. Stoicism doesn't promise the world won't burn. It promises you can walk through the fire unshaken. The reward? Inner freedom and peace. No external event can touch. This is resilience without needing a full tank of gas or a six-figure salary. Western materialism tied our identity to the very things now vanishing: possessions, status, and productivity. The Stoics remind us those were never truly ours. Now turn to Christianity, which has carried countless souls through plagues, wars, and personal ruin. This is from Thomas à Kempis's The Imitation of Christ. All our peace in this miserable life is found in humbly enduring suffering rather than in being free from it. He who knows best how to suffer will enjoy the greatest peace. John of the Cross in Dark Night of the Soul describes this as the soul's dark and arid purgation, the moment when old supports vanish and the soul feels abandoned, only to be purified for deeper union with God. Suffering isn't meaningless punishment, it's the greatest teacher. Think about the West right now. Empty shelves, the energy bills, the sudden precarity we never expected in our consumer paradise. We have no extended family rituals or community to share the burden, and this culture offers zero narrative that suffering has a purpose. Christianity gives exactly that. Endurance isn't defeat, it's the path to eternal glory and intimate union with the divine. In the spiritual vacuum we've created, this voice feels revolutionary. But it's not just Christianity. If we consider Buddhism, we find a similar message. Shantideva, in The Way of the Bodhisattva, teaches that suffering is universal, but the Bodhisattva path transforms it into compassion. And here are some lines from Shantideva. Suffering also has its worth. Through sorrow, pride is driven out, and pity felt for those who wander in samsara. Patience, kshanti, is one of the perfections. The reward? Liberation from self-clinging and the awakened capacity to help all beings. Buddhism says don't numb the pain or rage against it, but rather let it soften your heart. In a culture that medicates discomfort instantly, this patience is radical resilience. Here, faith isn't escape, it's the willingness to stay present and turn personal fire into fuel for compassion. Consider Hinduism next. The Bhagavad Gita opens on a battlefield that feels eerily like our moment. Arjuna is paralyzed by despair, exactly as many of us feel watching the world we built collapse. Krishna teaches three paths: detached union, karma yoga, devotion, bhakti, and surrender to the divine. He advises Arjuna to perform his duty without attachment to the fruits, and in return he will receive equanimity amid chaos and ultimate liberation. Arjuna drops his weapons in grief, just as we might freeze when the next redundancy or the next restructure hits us, or if the petrol station runs dry. The Gita doesn't say fix it all, it says act rightly, offer the outcome to the divine, and find peace inside the storm. For a Western culture addicted to control and outcomes in the external world, this surrender is the medicine we forgot that we needed. Finally, consider Western alchemy. Often misunderstood as mere proto-chemistry, it actually offers a powerful symbolic map for how to navigate suffering. In the works of George Ripley and Basil Valentine, the great work requires the negredo, the blackening, the dissolution, the stage of suffering and putrefaction before the gold can emerge. Crisis is the crucible. Our materialist West forgot this symbolic ancient truth. We treat every difficulty as a bug to fix, or a headline to doom scroll past. Alchemy says blackening is the work, the very breakdown of our affluence, job loss, energy rationing, identity collapse. This is the necessary dissolution that can birth something truer. Faith remembers what science alone cannot. Transformation demands the dark night. These voices, Stoic, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, and alchemical, all converge on one truth. The purpose of faith and spiritual practice has always been to sustain us in times of difficulty. They don't eliminate suffering, they redeem it. They give it meaning, direction, and ultimately freedom. In the West, our materialist culture declared itself post-faith and delivered unprecedented comfort until it didn't. And now we're paying the bill in anxiety, rage, and fragility. But here's the hope. These ancient maps are still available. They've carried people through far worse. The same wisdom that steadied Arjuna on the battlefield or St. John in his dark night can steady us in Melbourne traffic jams or fuel lines in Minnesota or layoffs in Manchester, anywhere in the Western world. So now there's a question that I'm sure you're asking yourself. Okay, this sounds great, but what do I actually do tomorrow morning when the power bill hits or the layoff email lands? These traditions aren't just theory, they're your inner fortitude toolkit. A lot of them have brief, short practices that you yourself can start to implement right now. I'm going to put links to all of the texts we've discussed today in the show notes. These are free, you can check them out, and you can see for yourself just what these voices have to say about suffering. Comparatively, the suffering we experience in the West, from an objective point of view, is minimal. Most of us will still live, most of us will still continue, but recall what Viktor Frankl said. It's all relative. There is no objectivity in suffering. When a person experiences suffering, depending on the context in which they grew up, which helped to construct the expectations that the reality that they face now falls short of, it doesn't matter what causes suffering or elation. The point is that this mindset can be used productively. I encourage everybody to check out these texts and stay tuned for future episodes when we will do deep dives into each one of them to try and extract some gold to help us in these troubled times. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Ciao for now. Bye.